Hi everyone, it's Emma Darcy here again in relation to client hacking. It is day 2. So if you have any questions on day 1, I hope you've got to do the personality test. I hope you've got to do the homework, and the whole point of all this is that you can implement it into your own businesses. As I said, client hacking is really about deep diving into who your customers are and how you can best market to prospective customers. And the only way of doing that is really being customer centric. And oftentimes, as I said to you in the first training, is, as business owners, we can have opinions, but they're not backed up by fact. So we can assume that our clients, our customers feel it a specific way, that they want specific things. But really, unless you do some market research, you don't really know the full story. So what I would say to you is, this is kind of giving you, a 30,000, high overview of your business and of your customers, and an idea of where to go and what to look at and what to look out for. What I always notice in marketing online now, and particularly in the online space, is there's a movement away from the customer in many regards, and a movement towards using particular tools without considering who the customer is. Now, sometimes there is obviously consideration of customer, but overall, there's not enough in-depth thought into, who is the customer and how can we best help them going forward. So just bear with me now. So in terms of the different groups, what I want you to start thinking of is, okay, well, who are my customers and what groups? How can I group them? So what you often find is you've got groupings of people coming to you. So for example, you might have moms coming to you, you might have dads coming to you, you might have, extreme sport enthusiasts coming to you. You'll have particular groupings of people that will gravitate towards you and your business because of what you stand for, what your values are as a business, what your brand stands for. So what I'm going to take you through is the 7 major lifestyle groups. And the idea of this is to just get you start thinking about the different groups that are available in, just in the social world, just within our culture. And, can you identify any of your customers within these 7 major lifestyle groups? So again, it's very much around kind of tying in together, the personality, the identity, like I was talking about in the last video. What's the identity? What does your customer feel their identity is? What are they trying to achieve in life? And can you help them get there? This is a little bit more along the lines of, okay, well, you've done a bit of market research and you know that people work in specific areas, that they earn approximately X amount of money, that they have, they're involved in music or they're involved in sport and so on and so forth. So it's kind of just building out the profile all the time. That's exactly what you're doing, is you're building out your client profiles. And again, the more you understand your customers, the better you can serve them in terms of better marketing communications to bring them in to work with you. And second, that you can deliver the best service or the best product possible because you understand your customers' needs. So the first one here in terms of 7 major lifestyle groupings is the mainstreamers. So some of these terms you'll have heard of before. This is slightly academic in that this is where I originally would have come across it. But again, the reason that it's used in academia is because there's a massive amount of research done around this, and this is actually what you need to understand. And as I said to you in the last video, this stuff, when you start client hacking, it can become quite unwieldy when you're starting off, and people become overwhelmed by the level of information that they're looking at. But if you actually stick with it for a couple of days, you actually really get a sense of exactly who your customers are, and that genuinely does help you on all levels in your business. So first up on the 7 major lifestyle groups, we've got the mainstreamers. This is the largest grouping of people in the lifestyle groups. And it's all about attitudes, include conventional. So the type of person that's a mainstreamer has a very conventional attitude. So it's very mainstream, trusting, cautious, and family-centered. So some of these you'll start to recognize your own family in, you'll start to recognize friends, you'll start to recognize clients, and indeed you'll start to recognize yourself in some of these groupings. For the mainstreamers, the leisure activities include spectator sports and gardening. Purchase behaviour is habitual, brand loyal and in approved stores. So, I mean, that's quite short. If you want to kind of broaden that out, you know, mainstream, in other words, the main, I suppose, accepted form of behavior in general in your society is, you know, something very conventional, very trusting, very family centered, maybe very religious, for example. That leisure activities include spectator sports. So that would suggest that people are following the crowd quite a lot. So, you know, if they follow particular brands, their friends probably will follow them too. Their purchasing behavior is habitual, so they would, you know, buy certain items or brand on a consistent basis, and they shop in approved stores. So everything is, for the mainstreamers, would deem to be around the fact that they're following the crowd. You know, there's kind of very little independence, if you will, there. You know, with the leisure activities, they're trusting and so on and so forth. So just have a think in terms of your own customers. Who are they? And start building out a profile. You know, do you have a lot of mainstreamers in your as your customer base, or are there prospective people that are interested in your product or service who are mainstreamers, but because perhaps you are a niche product or service maybe and are not approved in inverted commas, you know, maybe people are afraid, the mainstreamers are afraid to come and buy your product or service. And the question being then, what do you do to attract their attention? And really that's all about gaining trust, you know, getting them to know, trust and like you. You could do Facebook Lives, you could do video, you could demonstrate your product or service in multiple different ways, and that could help the mainstreamers overcome their habitual purchasing behavior and actually deviate and buy from somebody different. So again, it's all around understanding the customers and who they are. Number 2 then is the aspirers, and members of this group, which obviously are people, are unhappy, suspicious and ambitious. Leisure activities include trendy sports and fashion magazines. They buy fads, are impulse buyers, and engage in conspicuous consumption. Now, again, don't worry about the language of this. This is really, if you know, even no matter when you hear what I would call highfalutin language, never worry about it, because at the end of the day, it's just another way of describing something. And there's multiple ways of describing anything. So never be put off by, you know, bigger words, if you like, or more academic ways of describing things, because it's just a means of communication. And at the end of the day, if you look at the aspirers, these are obviously people aspiring to be at a certain level. Because they're not there already, they're unhappy, they're suspicious, there's a degree of cynicism there. They're ambitious because they want to get there. You know, it's citing here that leisure activities are trendy sports. So in other words, this particular grouping as well is influenced by others, so it has to be trendy. So how do they know it's trendy? Because obviously they're assuming their peers think it's trendy as well. They look at fashion magazines. So really they're looking at leaders in other groupings to demonstrate to them what they should wear, what type of sports they should play, and so on and so forth. So it would suggest that they're more easily led perhaps than the mainstreamers, that they're buying fads, that they're impulse buyers, you know. So again, if you're thinking of the buying behavior of your customers, your future customers, think of who they are and what are their buying habits, what are their habits in general. And I suppose really, where does your product and service fit into that overall context for the aspirers? If you're not sure what a conspicuous consumption is, that's really, really all around brands, you know, buying brands, for example. So they're buying Gap, perhaps, or they're buying, I don't know, BMW car or something like that. So conspicuous means other people can see it, obviously. So they're really wanting everyone to know who they are and what they buy. Number 3 then are the succeeders, and these people belong to the group that are happy, confident, industrious and leaders, and that their leisure activities include travel, sports, sailing and dining out. Purchase decisions are based on criteria like quality, status and luxury. So if you quickly look at that, you can see that the succeeders are more confident, they're happier, you know, they get about their work, they're not so easily influenced by others. Their leisure activities would suggest that, again, that level of independence. They're traveling, the sports, you know, they're trying new things, and dining out and so on and so forth. So everything that they're doing is in the context of being more autonomous and even their purchase decisions are more independent, because they're really looking at not just at whether it's a trend, not just at whether, like the other groupings where people are buying just for the sake of buying, but looking at the actual quality of the product or service, the status of it, which again does tie into the overall idea of, okay, well, when I'm buying a product or service, will other people approve of me doing so? And that's a very important question for many, many people when they're buying. So if you look back at my last video, you can see I spoke about, brides buying wedding dresses, and often that's a status symbol. So think about, what is your product? What is your services? What are they? Look at each one individually and decide, okay, well, how do my customers perceive the quality? How do my customers perceive their status when they buy my particular product or service? And on the scale of 1 to 10, how luxurious is my product or service, or how is it deemed to be? So oftentimes you've got to do a bit of market research in terms of actually asking your customers what they think, and not just assuming, as I said, but also recognizing these different types of customers as well. The transitionals then are number 4. And members of this group are liberal, rebellious, self-expressive, and intuitive. So there's kind of a movement away from the norms or the accepted norms in society with this particular grouping. They've unconventional tastes. So they're kind of going against the norm, So again, if you've got a niche product, maybe your niche product might appeal to them because it's unconventional, because it's niche and not everybody's doing it. They're big into music, travel and movies, and enjoy cooking, arts and crafts. So it suggests a lot of cultural activities, and a lot of independence is kind of the message coming through there. Their shopping behavior tends to be impulsive and to involve unique products. So again, niche products. So again, do you find that a lot of people that come to you are transitionals? They're rebellious. They're not exactly keeping in line with the status quo. They've unconventional tastes. So again, have a think and also do your market research. In other words, ask your customers, certain questions, and we can go into that. And if you've any ideas about what you'd like to ask your customers, please write them into the Facebook group. But really start thinking, okay, well, what information do I need? How do I get this information from people? So in other words, you can ask things like, do they like music, travel and movies? What types of movies do they go to? What influences them to go to it? What sort of food do they eat? Where do they travel to? And so on and so forth. And those questions will actually enable these different groupings to demonstrate to you, well, it'll demonstrate whether your customers are, or do they fall into any of these particular lifestyle groupings. And they will, of course, fall into some of them. Number 5 then is the reformers, and these are people that belong to the group that are self-confident and involved, have broad interests and are issues orientated. So again, this is gearing towards a more autonomous sort of person. They like reading, cultural events, intelligent games and educational TV. So it seems to be a lot more geared towards culture, intelligence, academia. They're deemed to have eclectic tastes, enjoy natural foods, and are concerned about authenticity and ecology. So there seems to be a movement away from the accepted norms in society with the reformers. And again, you need to look at your customer base and decide, not just decide, but find out, are your customers mainly reformers, or maybe 1% of them are, maybe 2% of them are, and if they are, how can you adapt your marketing so that they will be likely to buy from you? Number 6 then are the struggling poor. And this is where obviously disposable income will be a lot lower. Members of this group are again unhappy, suspicious, and feel left out. Their interests are in sport, music, and television, and their purchase behavior tends to be price-based. I mean, there's no surprise there. But they are also looking for instant gratification. And that's really around the fact that they're, a lot of things are withheld from them because of, lack of money and so on and so forth. So again, this particular lifestyle grouping can be quite obvious sometimes. But again, you need to ask your customers and figure out, okay, well, are maybe 10% of my clients, are they the struggling poor? And then, of course, that ties into your overall branding, your pricing, because, of course, if they're struggling, they may not be able to afford your prices. So you've got to think of that in the overall context of who you're selling to and also what are you providing for them. Now, number 7 is the resigned poor. And this group are unhappy, isolated, and insecure. Television is their main leisure activity, and shopping behavior is price-based, although they also look for the reassurance of branded goods. So I suppose these unfortunates, if you will, are resigned to being poor. So they've come to accept it. They're unhappy, they're isolated. And because they're of the poverty, they're insecure. Again, their whole lifestyle is based around lack of money. Television is their main leisure activity because of the lack of money. They're not getting out and about and being involved in cultural activities like some of the other groups. Their shopping behavior is price-based, again, for very obvious reasons. So again, that will prohibit them from buying certain products or services because of their lack of disposable income. And again, as business owners, we need to know whether we're pitching our products and services at people that just simply can't afford them. You know, I've had a couple of people come to me, you know, as a marketing consultant, and they're looking for advice because they're looking at starting up certain businesses. And, you know, sometimes there is a need for a particular service. But if you're in business, you know, and you're in business to make money, which I'm assuming most of you are, sometimes you have to keep away from serving the resigned poor sometimes. And again, I'm just trying to be practical about this. If it is a case that your own lifestyle is relying on this, you know, making money from what you're selling, then perhaps you've got to look further afield than the resigned poor, because they just simply may not be able to afford it. Now, that's not to say that they can't, but that's just an example of where, by understanding, okay, that the resigned poor are the people that need something that you're selling, can you afford to be offering your product or service at a price that would secure business from the resigned poor? You know, so you've got to really ask yourself some very hard questions sometimes around your customers and who are they, and focus on what's in it for you, and equally what's in it for them in the context of how does it benefit the customers from buying from you. Now, another aspect to look at is social class. Again, like I said in the last video, I don't like focusing on this, but unfortunately, it's something to look at. So what I'd ask you to do is, and you can see it in the homework, is identify and list which categories your customers fall into for each product or service you sell. What I also notice with people are that they might offer a couple of products or a couple of services, and maybe sometimes a lot more, but they lump all the customers in together. And that's really not the thing to do, because if you sell website design, that's very different from graphic design, and so on and so forth. So just to make sure that you differentiate from the different products or services, because you will have different types of customers coming to you for your different products or services. So if you're looking at social class, again, don't worry about the names in this, but it's kind of reiterating or saying again what I was saying in the last aspect of the video. But social class has a huge bearing on what's acceptable or considered to be acceptable by customers, what they would be prepared to buy, their disposable income, and so on and so forth. So the first part is social class. And again, this is just a slightly different way of looking at it that we've already spoken about. And the first one up is the precariat. And that's, you know, if you study sociology, this is what you study. This is the most deprived class of all, with low levels of economic, cultural, and social capital. And the everyday lives of members of this class are precarious. So every day is a struggle. If you've ever done Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that looks at, you know, at the bottom level where somebody's very basic needs are being met, like water, safety, and so on and so forth. And with the precariat, oftentimes they don't have these. So their whole lives are taken up being focused on just getting the basics in life. And so therefore they may not be your client if you are selling something more high-end or indeed something more involved, because they're so caught up in actually living on a day-to-day basis. Now, I'd also like to introduce to you here at this stage is, you know, the idea that it's not just about the economy, like as in what people can afford. It's also about cultural and social capital. And this is a very important aspect of what I'm going to teach you, because it's not just about the customer's identity, their self-identity. It's about cultural and social capital and economic capital as well. And what I mean by this is that sometimes your customers might be the precariat, or they're, very poor, the resigned poor. They might be deprived on an economic level. However, you might find that on a cultural level, so for example, they might go to art museums, maybe the free ones, but they go to art museums. Maybe they're into drama, maybe they're into music. So even though on an economic level, they might not be very productive, on a cultural level and indeed on a social level, their social capital can be much higher than you would expect perhaps from the deprived class. Now, traditionally, the deprived classes would not even rate on cultural and social capital levels, but nowadays they can. And if you're looking at social capital, that's really where you're popular, where you are able to walk into a room perhaps and be confident, and so on and so forth. And so whereby you carry yourself in such a way that people believe that you are something, or whatever the case may be. That's a very simplistic example. But really where you start thinking of just not alone what the disposable income of what your customers are, but also their cultural and social capital. It's a really important aspect that I probably say 100 times because it is very important. So you're also looking at the traditional working class, and this class scores low on all forms of three capitals, which is economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. So although that they're not the poorest group, they don't tend to be very culturally literate. They don't tend to be have social capital. And often this is really down to traditions, in that traditionally people that were of working class were not seen as upwardly mobile. In other words, they didn't go to, cocktail parties, they didn't go to balls perhaps, or whatever the case may be. But this is where, again, as business owners, you need to broaden the aspect of who your customers are. And it's not just about what they can afford, it's about their social and cultural capital as well. The next class that we have is emergent service workers. And this new class has low economic capital. In other words, they're not making much money, but has high levels of emerging cultural capital and high social capital. So this is where there's a particular grouping of people who they're service workers, so they're working in, waitressing or whatever the case may be. So they don't have much money. However, they are more aware about art, music, and so on and so forth. So they have an emerging cultural capital. So they become more important on a cultural capital scale. They also have high social capital. So they can be extremely gregarious. They might be into particular types of dance and so on and so forth. So they would be considered to be very acceptable on a social level. So the social capital is high. These people are young very often and found in urban areas, so emergent service workers. So really what I'm trying to teach you guys here is it's not just like the traditional working class, middle class, upper class. There's actually 7 different classes being identified by the BBC, who have interviewed over 160,000 people in the UK. And it just kind of gives a broader aspect as to who are people and what's driving them and what makes them do certain things, buy certain items, and this gives us an insight into why. So another social class is the technical middle class, and this is a new small class with high economic capital but seem less culturally engaged. This is, maybe IT people, so they make very good money but are not so culturally engaged. And if you read the newspapers at all, you can see maybe tech geeks and so on and so forth, which are sweeping generalizations, but they can be great at what they do. They're making fantastic money, but they're not really into music or theatre and so on and so forth. They also have relatively few social contacts and so are less socially engaged. So these are just different dynamics that have emerged over the last maybe 10 or 20 years, where somebody's actually making quite a lot of money, but their social and cultural capital is actually quite low. And I suppose really, if you're just wondering, why is that important? Well, if you're selling musical instruments, that's important because they don't believe technical middle class won't hold them high in esteem. They won't want to maybe go to the cinema. They may, but maybe not. They will not want to go to the theatre. They will not want to go out to social events. So if you're running or selling any of the above, they will not want to buy them because they don't deem it as important. So that's actually where it's important to understand them. New affluent workers. So this class has medium levels of economic capital and higher levels of cultural and social capital, and they are a young and active group. So these are people that maybe came from working class backgrounds, but now have, kind of more average level of money and higher levels of cultural and social capital. So on this cultural and social capital, you can see there's a trend emerging where some of these people have score higher than they do on the economic capital. So it's not always about money. The next one then in terms of social class is the established middle class. So this is kind of traditional. So the members of this class have high levels of all three capitals, although not as high as the elite. They are a gregarious and culturally engaged class. So this is just really where they have more money, and therefore through their families and what they're doing and so on and so forth, they actually have high levels of all three capitals. So again, this can be a lucrative class to look into if you're wanting to sell to this particular class, because they're more likely to buy from you. And then the last one then is the elite class. And this is the most privileged class in Great Britain, who have high levels of all three capital, their high amount of money, and because they have so much money, they tend to have more time. They tend to have more cultural and social capital as well. Okay, so just to give you a sense of, it's 7 different classes. You can see here the different, just an image of what that looks like. And really this is just to get you away from thinking, there's only 3 classes. There's actually 7 different social classes that have been identified within the last 3 years. Now it is just in the UK, but you can see where in different countries around the world that this can certainly be applied across the world, in the Western world that is in any case. And I suppose really it's got to get us thinking around, what's important to people? That's actually what this is about. So some of these classes, if you go back and look through them, you will see that they might have very low amounts of money. However, they might value certain cultural activities and are prepared to spend what money they have on attending those cultural activities. Or indeed, you could have somebody that doesn't make that much money, but puts a high value on attending certain social events and will spend the money on that. So really, this is again going back to, do you understand people? And therefore, do you understand your prospective customers? Because your prospective customers actually, even though they don't have much disposable income, it's where they choose to spend that disposable income that's important. And we're kind of moving away from the traditional aspect of lower class, middle class, and upper class. And this is what's emerging. So you really need to understand who your customers are in the context of, what do they value and what are they likely to spend their money on? So just a couple of things here, and again, you can look at the homework, but what's your customer's goals? So what do people truly want to achieve when they interact with a brand? So if you go back to their social class and so on and so forth, it'll help you to understand, where are they coming from? And what are their goals? And how can you help them achieve their goals? List those goals, because again, there you'll find there's a correlation. In other words, it'll tend to be, it'll come out what's important to people, and often there's similarities. So list the customer goals. Also look at the life cycle stage. So again, going back to the original aspect of what I was looking at and talking about, is that if somebody's 20, they're at a different point in their life to somebody who's 25 and 30 and 35 and 40 and so on and so forth. So what ages are your prospective customers? And if so, how does that lifestyle cycle stage impact their buying behavior? Okay, so again, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, come back to me in the group. Don't be shy. You're being a bit shy so far. Please do the homework. That's the important part, is actually action. So not just learning, but action. How can you apply this to your business? So I'd really, really appreciate if you guys would have a look and see, where you can learn about, how can you apply this. So for your homework then, you are looking at, what social class do your customers belong to? You may end up with 2 or 3 types. The trick is to recognize who belongs to which class and to adapt your marketing accordingly. The second part of the homework is, what is important to your customers, and really knowing what that is. What are your customers' goals in lives? And then the third part of your homework is, what life cycle stage are your customers at, and create at least one customer profile and share it in the Facebook group. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I would love some feedback. So please let me know how you're getting on, and I will talk to you all soon.